all these idiots who go around here talking about we don't have any role models in the community, I tell them which part of my anatomy they can place their lips, because I know no greater men in this world than the community of men that raised me. Okay, some of them had second grade education, some of them had no grade education, but they were all geniuses, and they were all committed to their family, and they also was committed to this country. Now, let's get to the country a minute. When we came home in the 60s from overseas duties, the revolutions, shall we call it, or struggle as some call it, was going on. And so the military, being in the military, that meant you were persona non grata. And so we had to explain to people why, this is the way they said it to us, why y'all over there killing yellow people for the white man who oppresses us back here in America, right? And so we had to respond to that. And our response was, don't judge America by where America stands, but rather how far America has traveled. Because if you understand anything about history, this is why I don't understand that idiot down there in Florida and some of them other idiots across the country who don't want the whole history of the country to be taught. Because that is what makes America what it is. This coming July, we will celebrate the 75th anniversary of President Harry Truman's executive order that desegregated the military. Now, you never hear it talked about, but Harry Truman was one of the greatest presidents we've ever had. Because if you look at the decisions that he had to make and the outcome of those decisions, you will see that he changed the moral fabric and the trajectory of our society. For example, Martin Luther King, and I'm gonna apologize to you right now, but Martin Luther King and Thurgood Marshall are not the ones who made America change its ways. It was our fathers who served in the United States military, who went in under Executive Order 8802 and endured all the racism, some of which is in that little piece that I handed out. They persevered, took it on the chin, and kept on moving. And they excelled wherever they were because they were not going to let the black community down. They were going to stand up for their race first. Because there's no other way you can explain the heroism that was inherent in our people. They were all of them were heroes. Now look, let me get to this point. I know you, while he's taking pictures, so I'm gonna go ahead and tell you the story about it. Look, how many of you have ever heard of Charles Jackson French? Raise your hand if you've heard of it. Now, let me tell you who he is. His boat, the Gregory, was sunk. And back during World War II, Navy personnel, blacks could only be shoe shine boys, cooks, or mess attendants, or janitors, or whatever, right? When the boat sunk, he got a raft, saved up to 15 young white sailors, to include a lieutenant, and put them in the raft. When he saw that the raft was drifting toward the Japanese line, and the Americans had dropped some flares which inadvertently, which showed the Japanese where their positions were, the Japanese started firing on him. So what did Charles Jackson French do? He got a rope, tied it around himself, and asked for help in tying the rope. Then he jumps out into the shark-infested water the shark-infested water, and he swam toward the American lines, thereby saving all of those people. Now, and I'm going to get something. I had written out something. Robert Adrian, with injuries in his legs and blast fragments in his eyes, regained consciousness and saw French swimming around and gathering injured shipmates to pile into a raft. With Adrian amongst the rescued sailors on board the raft, French started to tie a rope around his waist. Adrian attempted to talk French out of getting into the shark-infested waters, but French responded that he was more afraid of the Japanese than he was of the sharks. Just tell me if I'm going in the right direction. Now you're going to tell me he does not deserve the Congressional Medal of Honor? That's World War II. Now that brings us to the other gentleman, because we have a national campaign for him. Now, Senator Kane has put in a bill for both for both French and Dorie Miller. Now, here's the resistance is with the United States Navy. Because everybody, you can read that little piece there, everybody knows that Frank Knox was one of the most racist secretaries to ever be in the United States Navy. He reckoned he tried to get Japanese put into concentration camps even before the war started. That's how racist he was. And you will see that the Marines, which was part of the Navy, was just as bad, because the Commandant Holcomb of the Marine Corps said what? I have a question of 5,000 white boys, or 250,000 of them. Give me the 5,000 white boys. That was the attitudes. One of the sergeants who trained the Mount Point Marines, I think his name was, what was his name now? Germany, Sergeant Germany. You know, I'm an octogenarian now. Sometimes I have trouble pulling it up, right? But Sergeant Germany, when the second crew of blacks arrived at Mount Point, he told them straight up front, when that first group came here, I just wanted to puke. I went out and got drunk. And then he began to pounce on the new crew that came in and said that they didn't have any business being in the United States Marine Corps. Now that's what our fathers endured. They endured that, but yet they demonstrated heroism beyond anything you could imagine. Now, why is it that the Navy is so resistant? It beats me. Now, when you were young, you looked in the textbooks and it said Dorie Miller shot down up to maybe 6 Japanese aircraft. Don't even talk about that. We can't prove that because the Navy never kept records on anything that black folks did. Okay? All right, and so when you ask them to, hey, look, reconsider, I say, well, where's the documentation? But what we did, I've got some good friends. And when I say good friends, I'm not talking about just black folks. I'm talking about all folks. Got this guy named Ron Talbert. He and I was together with Joe Biden when we unveiled a monument to the African-American recipients of the Congressional Medal of Honor, which sits in Wilmington, Delaware. Okay, Sergeant Wilson K. Smith worked for 25 years to build that monument because he thought that the Medal of Honor recipients who were African-Americans should be properly recognized. Okay, now, Ron Talberton went through every after-action report, every morning report, and he found information all over on the USS West Virginia. And what he found was this. and everyone agrees to this, okay, that after exposing himself to Japanese gunfire and bombardment to pull the captain to safety, the captain eventually died, right? You all will know that story. But then he went out, and there were sailors trapped below deck. He then went below deck repeatedly to bring those sailors out of that toxic water, which was oil and water, which was on fire. Time and again, he went back and pulled them out. Now, that's exposing yourself to all kinds of dangers or what have you. Forget shooting down the airplanes. That alone should warrant the Congressional Medal of Honor. Now, in the early 1990s, Dr. Ramsey and others raised the issue about the fact that no blacks received Congressional Medal of Honors in World War II. So they passed legislation, and the Secretary of the Army commissioned Shaw University to do a study and to review those blacks who received high decorations like the Silver Star, etc. They came up with 7 names, and you know those 7 received the Congressional Medal of Honor. Only one of them was alive. I think it was Vernon Baker. I think he's from somewhere out in Idaho or Iowa, or what have you. But they received the Congressional Medal of Honor. But that was the Army. That was the Army. And it was really, and see, we can't blame white folks for this now, okay, or America, because Shaw University had a chance to straighten things out, but they didn't. Let me give you another example of what transpired during the 1990s under the Clinton administration. Well, in 1940, the population in America was 89.8% white, 9.8% black, and the rest counted as other. That's how they classified everybody else. Native Americans, everybody, other. Because that totaled up to what? Add it up yourself, 9.8 and 89.8, that's about 99.6, ain't it? Percent of the population that's black and white. But now, let's take a look at what happened with the Asian community. Now, remember that 0.5% we're talking about, that included Indians or Native Americans, Eskimos, Filipinos, all Asians. All right? And Hispanics. The Asians received 22 medals of honors. Now, how can that be? Look at those options. 22. Clinton, Penn gave up 22 Congressional Medal of Honors to the Asian community. They advocated and participated, and here it is. They highlighted them all. Okay? 22, and we can only get 7. Think about that. Look at the numbers we're talking about here. So, and you know, I'm preparing that case to smack Biden in the mouth, right? Hey, before July 26, and long before that, he will receive my final report and justification for Dorie Miller receiving the Congressional Medal of Honor. Okay? Now, I don't want you to forget this. The Navy has consistently resisted. You can read the cover, historical perspective, and I've got some extras if you want something to pass around. But on the back, It's a sample letter. What we're trying to do is to flood the Secretary of the Navy's office with letters to let them know that we are on our job. Okay? Now, I'm going to use Biden's own words. You know, he gave his little presentation the other day at that, when they roast the president and all. Yeah. All right, and he brought up one of my favorite ladies in history. Now, y'all know I was a history teacher right at Morgan. He brought up one of my favorite ladies, Ida B. Wells. And Ida B. Wells said, "Turn the light of truth upon the wrong." So what? so he's the one that brought it up. Now I'm gonna use it and give it back to him. Okay, but I need you to help turn the light of truth upon this wrong. And once we break the back of resistance of the Navy, then we might be able to get that swimmer, right? You know, we might be able to get him his grade, because Lord knows, I can't even imagine jumping. Look, I ain't jumping in the water anyway.
All right now.
Hey, look, I come from the concrete jungle, boy. We don't have swimming pools, right? So I need your help now, okay? Now, I want you to take a look at this. We do have a website. We've invested all of our personal monies into a good website. Check it out down the bottom here, okay? But I want you to take this. I want you to look at the website. There's more information on the website. Now, let me tell you how I got into the Dorie Miller thing again. I'm on the board of directors for the Congressional Black Caucus Veterans Brain Trust. At least I was before the pandemic, right? And in 2018, this little old white guy come in the room. And I saw him walk up on stage. And then he was introduced as former Congressman for New York, Joseph J. Diaguardi. I said, what the hell are he doing here? And what's he gonna talk about? Well, he got up there and began to extol the virtues of Dorie Miller. I had given up and said, hey, I'm done. You know, I mean, it was a long time ago. Because, you know, we tried to do that in the 60s or whatever. Joseph J. Diaguardi. And I always refer to him as the conservative Republican congressman from Westchester, New York, right? But he has been waging this battle for Dorie Miller for nearly 35 years. 35 years. Okay? So this is not a black thing. This is what? An American thing. Because how can we move forward and build the one nation that we want if we don't have truth? We've got to understand what has really happened. And you got the idiots down there in Florida and other places trying to keep people from teaching the truth. But how can you appreciate where America is today if you don't know where America's been? Yes, my ancestors were slaves, and I can trace them all the way back to 1700. But so what? So what? We're going to talk about it. And yes, got a whole lot of white folks in my family from back then, too. Hey, because look, the slavery was just a thing to put you in the cotton fields. There was other things going on, too. Okay, that's how we lighten up, man. Hey, listen, that's the truth. And we must shine that light upon the truth. Okay? So, but, you know, all the McClendons in my family, very light-skinned people, some you couldn't tell from white folks. Strange thing about it, their daddy left them land. It's bad. See, they don't talk about that. But those of you who from down south, you know some of those white fathers left those children land. And so within our community, we have black men who owned their land. We had black men who leased their land. And we had black men who were sharecroppers. If you were a sharecropper, you was looked down by everybody. Okay, if you leased the land, that was a step up. If you owned the land, you was at the top of society, right? But they don't tell you the truth. They don't want you to know the truth. And one of the things that our leadership does, and I get tired of that crybaby crap about, well, they don't tell our story in the history book. Well, why should they tell your story in the history book? You ought to be trying to tell your own daggone story.
That's right, that's right.
How you expect Italians to tell black folks story? Now, I know J. DeGuardi is doing it, but that's our job. That's our job. Okay? And look, they don't know our story anyway. And you ain't even trying to learn. Let me tell you what my next project is other than this. More than 9,000 blacks fought in the Revolutionary War, right? For the American. More than 9,000 fought for the British. Because the British promised them what? Freedom. And when Britain lost, what did they do? They took some of them to the Caribbean. They sent some up to Nova Scotia. Some stayed in Nova Scotia. But some of those that went to Nova Scotia followed Thomas Peters and others to found the modern-day state of Sierra Leone. They are your ancestors from here, too. But when somebody ain't nobody going to tell you that. But let's look at the Americans. Okay, we know Prince Hall, and we got a whole lot of other names, but one I like to bring up is a gentleman by the name of James Forten. How many have ever heard of James Forten? Okay, look. James Forten was captured. It was either 14 or 15 years of age by the British, and he was in a POW camp. And he and the captains of the camp, son, was shooting marbles. Captain observed him and said, damn, this kid is real bright. So he wanted to take this kid and send him to England with his son to be educated. Forten turns it down. He turned down freedom and said, look, I'm a patriot and I will stay here with my comrades. Now, if he was white like Nathan Hale, we'd be saying that right now, because you know when you go to basic training, what did Nathan Hale say?
Give me there.
No, that was the other guy that ride. All right, but Nathan Hale gave one of those statements that we always cling to as part of our military tradition. James Forten, at the end of the war, he goes home to Philadelphia. He becomes a sailmaker apprentice. A sailmaker apprentice. He was such a genius, coming up with new inventions and new ways of doing things, that eventually, when the owner died, he bought the company. And then he built the company to the point where he became one of the richest men in Philadelphia. If he was one of the richest men in Philadelphia back then, that means he was one of the richest men in America, because Philadelphia was the heart and soul of America back then. Now, he financed the building of civic buildings and other public facilities. He financed the Underground Railroad, the black churches, all of that. All of that. And he was one of the leading citizens, you know, in this country. But why is it that we don't know about? Look, Philadelphia took them to 2014 to recognize this man. Can you imagine that? 2014. But then we must take responsibility for that, because we should know our own history. Okay, we should know our own history. Now, to show you how things change, he has a son, James Forten Jr. If you ever get a chance, take a look at Howard Bell. He was one of my professors. This was his doctoral thesis. It was called Black Nationalism, 1820 to 1850. Now, y'all ain't never heard no black nationalism. All y'all ever been taught was slavery, right? 1820 to 1850. And what they said was this. This is his generation now. We will go back to Africa and leave America. His father said, no, son. No, no, no. If we leave here and go back to Africa, then who will watch over our brethren back here? And the son says, no. If we go back to Africa, we can grow cotton. Cotton is what keeps what? Slavery going. And we can sell our cotton from there much cheaper. Now, to show you how we've been so programmed, because most of us have white minds anyway, right? Because we've been programmed that way. One of them would have called the other Uncle Tom, wouldn't they? Huh? Whenever you disagree with another black, the first thing they do is call you an Uncle Tom. Just like if I stand up here and give praise and honor to America, which I always do, and I ain't ashamed of doing it, somebody will ultimately, them young idiots or old idiots will call you what? An Uncle Tom. That is the difference in knowing history and understanding history and not understanding it. Now, and I'm getting ready to close out now because I get up here, y'all give me this little mic, I'll be gone all day, right? I'm just now warming up. Now, the one thing, the biggest problem we have with our children today is that our children have no respect for America. Okay? Even during the most difficult times of our growth, we have problems, but we never lost faith in America. Because our parents taught us that we had to do what? Be twice as good. Y'all remember that? Boy. In this world, you gotta be twice as good to make it. And you can't never let a white boy do you in anything. On the other hand, down south, the old white guy was telling his son, boy, if you ain't better than that N-word, what good are you? Now, this is the kind of world we grew up in. Now, these are the kind of truths that we have to understand. But that's what our fathers did. They protected us against the racism that we were going to encounter by building us up into strong individuals. This is why when you look at a school like Dunbar High School in D.C., and there has never been a high school anywhere, private or otherwise, in this country that can compare with the old Crimson Tide of old. Not one. But when integration comes, they destroyed Dunbar High School. They destroyed it. Everybody that was anybody, I don't talk about Ralph Bunge, you talk about, what's the guy named, any and all of them, Duke Ellington, you name them. They all came out of Dunbar High School here. Charles Hamilton Houston. They came out of Dunbar, and they came out and they knew who they were and what they were supposed to do. But then when integration comes, they locked us in as a neighborhood school, and they blocked everybody else from going to the school. And so the school began to tumble downhill because DC wasn't going to put any money in it anyway. Okay, so, and the same with all the other black institutions that existed, because the one thing we have not recognized or dealt with psychologically or any other way is integration automatically means what? the death of black institutions. It means the death of black institutions. But yet we try to keep them going because we know their value. This is why we come up with terms like HBCU. Because if we don't have that, then what we got? And so now, despite all of that, we have to begin to think in terms of one America, one society. And we have to educate not only our folks, but we have to educate all people. And this is why those idiots that we spoke of before are a thing out of the past, because we done seen this before. When the radical Republicans in the 1860s and 1870s passed all these laws to make black folks equal to anybody in this country. Because, you know, it was a Republican Party then, okay? They had all kinds of civil rights acts. But then the Democrats started creeping in. You know, that old Southern, what they call it, the Democratic South, right? And they started gaining more strength up in places like New York. And then in 1876, the Chilton Hayes Compromise. They compromised so that Hayes, the Republican, can get the election. And what happened? Everything began to go downhill. The Supreme Court started making decisions, disqualifying the Civil Rights Acts of 1875. They were struck down in 1883. And then they started, what they call it, the poll taxes, grandfather clause, and all these other things to suppress our capacity to participate in the democratic processes. And then in 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson established a separate but equal, and the Supreme Court was right there. We have seen this because one of the agreements in 1877 was that Hayes would get the presidency, but he had to pull the Union soldiers out of the South, right? And once he pulled the Union soldiers out of the South, the Ku Klux Klan, the Purple Legs, and all these other violent paramilitary groups, just like we have existed today, came to the forefront. We have seen this before. This is where we are right now. And so we have to begin to think about that, to talk about that, how we go defend our community, who are our allies. And one of the things we have to do is to begin to give our vision of what America should be. Okay? And we got to get away from all this negative stuff because we ain't going nowhere. This is it. And so we have to begin to rethink what America's supposed to be. And just like we used to tell the kids back then, what are you going to do to make America what it ought to be? Thank you.